My daughter-in-law's scream echoed through the living room like a dry clap of thunder, splitting in two the little air I had left in my lungs. I am Eleanor. I'm 71 years old. I was a geography teacher for 4 decades, and today I discovered that to my only son's wife, I am nothing more than a bulky old piece of furniture taking up too much space. I have a secret kept inside my blue suitcase. One that will change the coordinates of this house forever. I've been living with my son Robert and his wife Carla for 3 years. So you won't be alone, Mum, he told me with that good boy face he's always had, the one that served him so well to hide his lack of spine. So you can lend us a hand, she added, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The hand became the whole arm, then the back, and finally my entire life. Today was one of those days that feel 100 hours long. Since the sun broke through the kitchen window, my feet hadn't touched the floor, except to rush from one side to the other. I have 3 grandkids who are the light of my life, but who pack the energy of a Category 5 hurricane. The oldest, Jake, who's 8, decided the living room was a battlefield for his plastic soldiers. The middle one, Lucy, 5, ran a fever and threw up twice on the rug I had just scrubbed last week. And the baby little 10-month-old Nick is teething and hasn't stopped crying for a single second, as if the ache in his gums were the pain of the whole world. By 5 p.m, my knees were shaking, my hip was throbbing, that sharp sting that reminds me of the dampness of past winters. I had cooked lunch, chicken and rice, dicing the onions paper thin, just how Carla likes them, making sure the garlic didn't burn. I had cleaned up Lucy's vomit, scrubbing with vinegar and baking soda so the smell wouldn't linger. I had rocked Nick to sleep, pacing the apartment's endless hallway until my arms felt like lead. I had helped Jake with his addition and subtraction, patiently explaining that if you have 5 apples and eat 2, you have 3 left, even though he insisted he would just eat them all. When the wall clock struck 6:30, I was perched on the edge of the sofa, with Nick finally asleep in my lap. The house wasn't perfect. There were toys on the floor because Jake refused to pick them up. There was a dirty plate on the table because I didn't have time to wash it before the baby started wailing again. But there was peace, or so I thought. The key turned in the lock with a violent snap. Carla stormed in like a gust of wind, slamming her purse down on the dining table with a hard thud. Her brow was furrowed, carrying that deep vertical line between her eyes that shows up when traffic is brutal or her boss gives her a bad look. Robert walked in behind her, head down, carrying his briefcase like it was full of rocks. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, and her voice woke Nick, who instantly let out a shriek. I tried to stand, but the weight of the baby and the ache in my joints made me slow. "Carla, please, the baby just fell asleep," I whispered, trying to defuse the bomb before it went off. She didn't hear me. Her eyes, lined with a perfect black wing that hadn't smudged all day, scanned the room like a radar looking for targets. She saw the plastic soldier under the table. She saw the crooked throw pillow. Above all, she saw my exhaustion, and instead of pity, it fueled her rage. "The house is filthy!" she bellowed, pointing at the floor with an accusing finger and a flawless red manicure. "I bust my arse working 10 hours a day to come home to this pigsty. Look at this, there's dust on the TV." Robert tried to step in, but it was such a pathetic attempt, it just sparked pity. "Honey, I'm sure Mum didn't have time. The kids. Don't give me excuses, Robert." She cut him off, spinning toward me with a fury that froze my blood. "I asked you for one thing, Eleanor. One single thing. To keep the house decent. You don't pay rent. You don't pay the electric bill. You eat our food. The absolute least you could do is keep this place clean." I felt the heat creeping up my neck. I don't pay rent, that's true. But my teacher's pension, which isn't a fortune but isn't pennies either, goes entirely to the grocery store every single month. I buy the meat, the fruit, Nick's diapers. I paid to fix the washing machine last month when she overloaded it. But in her mental ledger, I am a burden. Carla, the kids have been very restless today. Lucy threw up and I tried to explain, keeping my voice steady, that same tone I used in the classroom to calm down 40 teenagers. You always have an excuse. She stepped into my personal space, smelling like expensive perfume and corporate stress. You are so ungrateful. We put a roof over your head and this is how you pay us back. You're good for nothing, you lazy old woman. Sitting here all day, scratching your belly while we kill ourselves working. The sentence hung in the air. Good for nothing, you lazy old woman. I looked at my son. I waited. I waited for that crucial second where he would raise his voice and say, "Don't speak to my mother like that." I waited for him to remember who cleaned his scraped knees when he fell off his bike, who worked double shifts to put him through college, who gave him the down payment for this very apartment. But Robert looked down. He started untying his shoes like the argument had nothing to do with him. His silence hurt more than her screaming. It was a cowardly, complicit silence. The silence of a man who prefers the comfort of not fighting with his wife over the dignity of his mother. In that moment, something snapped inside me. It wasn't my heart, like they say in the soap operas. It was something harder, like a rusted chain finally giving way. I felt a sudden clarity, cold and absolute. I set Nick down gently in his playpen, even though he was still whimpering. I stood up. My spine cracked, but I forced myself to stand as tall as humanly possible. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply looked her in the eyes with an intensity that made her falter for a split second. I saw her blink, confused by my lack of reaction. She was expecting me to apologize, to lower my head like I always did. I walked right past her without brushing her shoulder and headed for my bedroom. "And don't turn your back on me when I'm talking to you," she screamed behind me. I closed my bedroom door and slid the deadbolt. The noise outside muffled. I sat on the bed, that twin-sized bed that used to belong to Jake and was now my only sanctuary. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was an adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. I looked around. In that cramped room, stuffed with boxes of things that didn't fit anywhere else, my life had been reduced to its barest minimum. But my eyes landed on the closet. Up there on the top shelf, hidden behind some ratty blankets, was my old brown leather suitcase. And inside it, my safe passage. I stood up and pulled the suitcase down. It smelled of confinement and mothballs. I opened it on the bed. My fingers dug into the inner pocket and pulled out a small notebook with black covers and yellowed pages. It was my field journal, the one I used to take when I led my students on mountain hikes. But for the last few years, it had served a very different purpose. I opened it. Written inside were bank account numbers. Not the account Robert knows about, the one where my pension gets deposited and always sits at zero by the end of the month. No, the other one. The account I opened with the money from selling the big house. The one I sold when my husband died, right before I moved in here. Robert thinks that money got eaten up by debts and medical bills. I never corrected him. I wanted to have an emergency fund just in case. The just in case had arrived, and it had a first and last name, Carla Miller. I looked at the balance scribbled on the last page. It was enough. More than enough. And then I touched the folded piece of paper tucked next to the notebook. The deed to a small piece of property on the coast, in a fishing town called Cape Haven. A little house my late husband and I bought 30 years ago, with retirement in mind, which had been rented out to a foreigner all this time. The tenant's lease expired last week. The house is empty. The house is mine. I started to pack. Not rushing, but methodical, like someone prepping for a geographical expedition. Light clothes, my blood pressure meds, my reading glasses, a photo of my grandkids that I took out of its frame so it would take up less space. I didn't take anything they had given me. I left the grey sweater Carla gave me last Christmas because it was too big for her own mother, folded perfectly over the back of the chair. Outside, the yelling had stopped. I heard the clinking of silverware. They were eating dinner. Carla was probably complaining that I hadn't set the table, and Robert was probably nodding along, eating the rice I cooked. The irony brought a twisted smile to my face. I waited. The hours crawled by. I listened as they bathed the kids, turned off the lights and went to bed. I heard Robert snoring through the drywall. By 3 a.m, the house was dead silent, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I dressed in my most comfortable pants and a pair of sneakers. I put on my beige coat, the one with the deep pockets. I checked the suitcase one last time. I zipped it up carefully so it wouldn't make a sound. I grabbed my cell phone and opened the rideshare app. My fingers, usually clumsy with technology, moved with surgical precision. Destination, Southside Bus Terminal. From there, the coastal expresses leave every hour. I walked out of the bedroom at 5:50 in the morning. The living room was submerged in shadows. The streetlights bled through the window, highlighting the toys Carla hadn't bothered to pick up despite her screaming fit. I walked through the kitchen. I left my set of apartment keys on the counter. Nothing else. Not a note, not an explanation, not a tear-stained letter. My absence would be my message. I opened the front door. The crisp, early morning air hit my face, and I felt like I was truly breathing for the first time in 3 years. The car was waiting downstairs, headlights glowing. The driver, a young guy in a baseball cap, helped me load the suitcase into the trunk. "Morning, ma'am. Up early or out late?" he asked politely as I settled into the back seat. I looked up at the third-floor window. It was dark. Up there slept my son and his wife, certain that when they woke up, they'd have breakfast waiting, and the useless old woman ready to scrub away their miseries. They had no idea that their cook, their nanny, their maid, and their emotional punching bag had just handed in her irrevocable resignation. "Neither, young man," I answered, feeling an ancient, powerful force waking up in my chest. "I'm escaping from prison." The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. He put the car in drive and we pulled away down the empty avenue. As the concrete city faded behind us, I pulled out my black notebook and brushed my thumb over the cover. I imagined the ocean. I imagined the salt on my skin. I imagined the silence. But mostly, I imagined the look on Carla's face when she woke up in 2 hours and discovered that the lazy old woman had taken more than just her clothes. She had taken away their comfort. The journey was just beginning, and I, Eleanor, the retired geographer, was about to redraw the map of my existence. The interstate bus smelled like cheap coffee and pine disinfectant, a mix that would have turned my stomach on any other day. But today, it tasted like freedom. I took a window seat on the shady side, watching the grey city buildings shrink until they vanished, swallowed by the deep green vegetation lining the highway toward the coast. At 71, with knees protesting the dampness and a heart beating with a force I thought I'd forgotten, I felt like a fugitive in an action movie. Only my weapon wasn't a gun. It was a gold debit card tucked deep inside my bra. For the entire 4-hour ride, I didn't close my eyes. Like a good geography teacher, I dedicated myself to observing the terrain. I watched the topography shift from suffocating urban valleys to the rolling hills that announce the ocean. Every mile I put between my daughter-in-law Carla and myself was a boulder lifted off my shoulders. I pictured the absolute chaos unfolding in the apartment at that very second. It would be 8 a.m. Carla would be frantically hunting for Jake's socks. Baby Nick would be screaming because no one had mashed his banana to the exact consistency only I knew how to get right. And Robert would be staring at the clock, realizing he was going to be late for work, paralyzed by the absence of his mother, the useless one. Stepping off at the Cape Haven terminal, the wall of humid, salty heat welcomed me like a hug from an old friend. The town had changed a bit in the 3 years I'd been gone, held hostage by grandmotherly duties, but the soul of it was the same. The hum of the scooters, the women selling fruit with baskets on their heads, and that slow, deliberate rhythm that only places ruled by the tide seem to have. The first thing I did wasn't to go to the house. I went to the bank. I needed to touch reality with my bare hands. I walked into the small branch across from the town square, its air conditioning humming over spotless white tile floors. I approached the ATM with an irrational spike of fear. What if the bank had gone under? What if my memory had scrambled the PIN code? My fingers, which had trembled so many times serving Carla soup for fear of staining her tablecloth, now moved with absolute certainty over the keypad. Check balance. The screen blinked for a second that felt like a lifetime. And there it was, the number. The money from selling the big house, plus the accumulated interest, plus the rent the property management company had been religiously depositing month after month. It was a substantial amount. I wasn't a yacht and caviar millionaire, but I was a woman rich in options. I could hire nurses. I could take cabs. I could eat at a diner every single day if I felt like it. I could buy Carla's arrogance and hand it back to her wrapped in a bow. I printed the receipt just for the sheer pleasure of holding it. I folded it carefully and tucked it next to my black notebook. I walked out of the bank with my chin held high. A guy selling lottery tickets approached me. "Buy a ticket, ma'am. Change your luck," he said with a toothless grin. I bought the whole booklet without haggling. "My luck already changed, son. This is just for fun," I told him, slipping him a tip that made his eyes go wide. I walked the 4 blocks to my house. My property is a simple build, white walls, a red shingled roof, and a wide front porch where I used to sit with my husband and watch the afternoon bleed away. The paint on the fence was peeling, and the front yard was a jungle of weeds, but it was mine. I pulled out the set of keys I had guarded like a sacred artifact at the bottom of my suitcase. The key turned smoothly, without resistance, as if welcoming me home. The inside smelled stale and dusty, but beneath the white sheets draped over the furniture, I recognised my past life. There was my wicker rocking chair. There was the coffee table where I graded thousands of exams. And resting on the faux fireplace mantel, the antique wooden radio my husband restored before he died. I dropped the suitcase on the floor and let myself fall onto the covered sofa. The silence was absolute. No screaming, no TV blasting cartoons at max volume, no orders barked from the doorway. Just the distant sound of waves crashing against the sand. I looked at my hands. They were rough from the bleach and cheap dish soap Carla insisted on buying. "You're good for nothing," she had told me. That phrase echoed off the empty walls of my house. I stood up, driven by an anger that didn't hurt anymore. It simply propelled me. I walked into the bathroom and looked in the spotted mirror. I saw an older woman, yes, with wrinkles that mapped out my laughter and my grief. With grey hair, I stopped dying because Carla thought it was a waste of money. But I also saw eyes that had reclaimed the spark of authority. "Eleanor," I said out loud, testing how my name sounded in my own house. "Welcome to your kingdom." I needed supplies. I headed back out to Mrs. Gertrude's corner store 2 blocks away. I hoped she wouldn't recognise me, or maybe assumed she had passed away. But there she was, older and more hunched behind the wooden counter lined with candy jars. "Good afternoon," I said. She squinted, adjusting the thick glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Holy Mother of God!" she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Is that you, Mrs. Eleanor? I thought the earth had swallowed you whole." "Almost, Gertrude, almost. But the earth spat me right back out," I joked. The warmth she treated me with was the most brutal contrast I had felt in years. She didn't talk to me like I was a brainless toddler or a slow-moving nuisance. She spoke to me as an equal, as a respected neighbour. She asked about my health, about my kids, and I lied with shocking ease. "They're doing great, just very busy," I said. I bought coffee, fresh bread, cheese, ham, brooms, rags, and bleach. But this time I bought the expensive bleach, the one that smells like lavender. I paid with a crisp, large bill and felt zero guilt. I walked back home hauling the bags. The weight reminded me of the grocery runs I did for my daughter-in-law, but the difference was staggering. This food was for me. Nobody was going to eat the best part of the chicken and leave me the bone. Nobody was going to complain that the bread was too hard or too soft. I spent the afternoon cleaning. It might seem ironic to escape scrubbing one house just to scrub another, but the psychology of labour is a funny thing. Dusting my shelves, sweeping my floor, wiping down my memories. It was an act of taking ownership. With every sweep of the broom, I swept out a little bit of the toxicity from the last 3 years. In a kitchen drawer, I found an old manual can opener, rusted but functional. I held it for a moment. It was a simple object, stupid even, but it was mine. It wasn't Grandma's. It wasn't hand me that. It was my can opener. By sunset, the house no longer smelled stale. It smelled of lavender and fresh brewed coffee. I poured myself a large mug black and without sugar, exactly how I like it, and how I could never drink it back there because Robert hated the smell of strong coffee. I took the old wooden radio off the mantel, popped in the new batteries I bought from Gertrude, and clicked it on. A local station was playing old jazz standards. I sat out on the porch in my newly uncovered wicker rocking chair, watching the sun sink into the ocean, bleeding violent shades of orange and violet across the sky. It was a perfect geographical spectacle. Then, and only then, I decided I was ready for the second act. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. It had been on airplane mode since I walked out of the apartment. My thumb hovered over the black screen. I knew that turning on that little light meant opening the floodgates to the insanity I had left behind. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with salt air, and toggled off airplane mode. The phone vibrated, and vibrated, and kept vibrating like it was having a seizure in the palm of my hand. 54 missed calls. 18 voicemails, 102 text messages. Most were from Robert, a few from an unknown number I assumed was Carla's office. I started reading, not with dread, but with the clinical curiosity of a scientist studying an ant colony after kicking over their anthill. Robert, 7:15 a.m. Mom, where are you? I went to your room and you're not there. Did you go to the store? Robert, 7:30 a.m. Mom, pick up. Nick is crying and we can't find his pacifier. Carla, 7:45 a.m. From Robert's phone. Eleanor, this isn't funny. Stop hiding. We're running late. Robert, 8:10 a.m. Mom, for God's sake, did something happen? We're worried. Carla, 8:30 a.m. You are so irresponsible. You made me miss a massive meeting. When you get back, we are having a very serious conversation. I let out a dry laugh that spooked a lizard running up the wall. When you get back, I thought, the sheer arrogance of that woman knew no bounds. She still thought this was a tantrum, a quick stroll around the block. It hadn't even crossed her mind that the lazy old woman had a master plan. I kept scrolling through the texts. As the day progressed, the tone shifted from anger to logistical despair. Robert, 1:20 p.m. Mom, I had to leave work. We didn't have anyone to watch the kids. Carla is furious. Please call us. Robert, 2 p.m. I called the hospitals. I called the police. Mum, you're scaring me. Where are you? That text gave me a brief sting of guilt. Robert was weak, yes, but he was my son. I didn't want him thinking I was dead in a ditch. But then I remembered his silence last night. I remembered him untying his shoes while his wife humiliated me. The guilt evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold resolve. They had to learn, and some lessons have to be carved in stone, or in this case, carved in absence. The last message had come through 5 minutes ago. Robert, 6:25 p.m. Mum, we found your keys on the counter. Did you leave? Why? We don't have anything in the fridge for dinner. Jake is asking for you. I lifted the coffee mug to my lips. It was lukewarm, but it tasted like absolute glory. We don't have anything in the fridge. Of course not, because the magic fridge that stocked itself through my pension and my back-breaking grocery runs had officially broken down. I thought about replying, typing a simple, "I'm fine," but my thumbs froze over the keyboard. No. If I answered now, I'd give them relief. I'd give them the certainty that I was still within their reach. And power lives in uncertainty. They needed to feel the void. They needed the house to be genuinely filthy. They needed the kids to cry inconsolably. They needed dinner to not magically appear. They needed to live in the real world, the one I had shielded them from for 3 years. I set the phone face down on the table. The radio started playing Sabor a mi. I hummed the melody softly. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I flipped open my black notebook on the spotless counter. On a fresh page, I drew a line straight down the middle. On the left side, I wrote, "What they believe." Underneath it, I wrote, that I'm old, poor, useless, and dependent. On the right side, I wrote, the reality. Underneath that, I wrote, I have a house, I have money, I have time, and I have the willpower to do this. I looked out the window at the dark street of the town. Fireflies blinked in the front yard. Tomorrow I'd go to the local salon, chop my hair off, maybe get my nails painted a scandalous red just like Carla's, just to laugh at the irony. My life as a piece of old furniture was over. My life as a strategist had just begun. And I had a sneaking suspicion that back in the city it was going to be a very, very long night for the perfect family. I flicked off the kitchen light, leaving only the glow of the moon spilling through the glass door. Tomorrow was another day, and for the first time in a long time, the day belonged entirely to me. Let them suffer a little longer, I whispered to the dark, feeling a perverse, delicious satisfaction. We're just getting started. The coastal sun doesn't ask for permission. It slips through the cracks of the wooden shutters with a hot, golden authority that forces you awake, but without the violence of an alarm clock or a screaming infant. I stretched out in the bed, taking up the entire mattress, feeling my bones pop. But this time it was the creak of settling in like an old house resting on its foundation, not a crack of pain. It was 7 a.m. In my past life, the one I abandoned barely 24 hours ago, by this time I would have already changed 3 diapers, cooked 4 different breakfasts, and been sweeping toast crumbs out from under Jake's chair. Here, the only thing I had to sweep was a little bit of sand the wind had pushed under the door. I got up and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The cold tile felt glorious under my feet. While the coffee brewed, filling the house with that dark, promising aroma, I opened my black notebook. I had a plan. Running away wasn't enough. I had to cement my new reality. If I wanted this house to be my fortress, I needed allies, and I needed repairs. The front fence was leaning, the paint was peeling like sunburned skin, and the yard was a jungle. I stepped out onto the porch with my mug. A guy was riding by on a bicycle selling pastries. I bought 2 sweet rolls and asked him if he knew a good handyman. Look for Joe down by the estuary drop-off. Man can build a wall with one hand and fix your plumbing with the other, the baker told me, handing over the bread in a brown paper bag. That morning, as I walked toward town looking for Joe, I felt a strange lightness in my purse. I wasn't carrying wet wipes, backup toys, or crushed crackers, just my wallet, my keys and my phone, which kept vibrating intermittently like a wounded animal in my pocket. I didn't look at it yet. No, first I had to secure my perimeter. I found Joe patching up a fishing net in his front yard. He was a man around my age, maybe a little older, with sun-cured skin and hands that looked carved from driftwood. Morning, I said, projecting my teacher voice, firm but polite. I'm told you perform miracles on old houses. Joe looked me up and down, without the rush or the judgment of city folks. Miracles are up to God, ma'am. I do masonry and plumbing. What do you need? We struck a deal. I didn't haggle over his labour rate, but I was demanding about the materials. I wanted the house to shine. I wanted to make sure that if Robert or Carla ever dared to come looking for me, they'd find a mansion of dignity, not the sad refuge of an old woman. I handed him a cash advance. Watching his eyes widen as he took the bills without hesitation was my first victory of the day. In the city, Carla audited every single grocery receipt to make sure I hadn't pocketed the change from the tortillas. Here, I was the boss. Walking back home, I passed a beachwear shop. I stopped at the window display. A pair of oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses with dark lenses caught my eye. I walked in and tried them on. They hid my eye bags. They hid my age. They made me look mysterious, untouchable. I bought them. Stepping back onto the street with them on, I felt like I had strapped on a suit of armour. When I got home, the phone started ringing again. It was the specific ringtone I had assigned to my son's house. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I sat down in the rocking chair, kept my new sunglasses on even though I was in the shade, and picked up the device. 112 missed calls in total. Curiosity, that old geographer's vice of wanting to know what's on the other side of the mountain, got the better of me. I opened my messages. The tone of the texts had drastically shifted. They had moved past the initial anger and logistical confusion, straight into the accusation and chaos phase. Carla, 9:15 a.m. Eleanor, this is the last straw. Jake can't find his gym uniform. Where did you put it? Answer me. Robert, 10:30 a.m. Mum, we had to order pizza last night, and Nick threw it up. He's been puking all morning. Carla is hysterical. Please, drop the drama and tell us where you are. I smiled with a coldness that surprised me. Drama, they called it. 30 years of a career, 3 years of domestic slavery, and my departure was drama. The mystery of Jake's uniform was simple. It was in the ironing basket right where I left it 2 days ago. If Carla had lifted the lid of that hamper once in her life, she'd know. But she only knows how to dump dirty clothes on top of the washer, expecting elves or her mother-in-law to process them. But then I read a message that made me sit up straight. Carla, 11 a.m. If you don't show up by this afternoon, I'm changing the locks. Let's see how you get in to fetch your old rags then. There was the threat. The stupid assumption that I needed to return. That their apartment was my entire universe. They understood nothing. They didn't know my old rags were already here, or that the ones I left behind meant absolutely nothing to me. I decided it was time to make my first strategic move. Not a direct reply, but a reminder of who was actually holding up the pillars of their comfort. I opened my banking app, scrolled to the automatic debits, and there it was. Telecommunication services, the premium family plan. High-speed internet cable TV with all the sports channels Robert watches and the cartoon networks that hypnotize the kids. $110 a month drafted out of my account from my pension because, Mum, you're home all day, you're the one who uses it the most. My fingers tapped the touchscreen with lethal precision. Cancel subscription. Are you sure? Yes. Effective date, immediate. I also pulled up the online grocery account, the one where my credit card was saved for emergency deliveries. I deleted it. I wiped the data, changed the password, and felt an almost childish thrill picturing the exact moment the TV screen would cut to black in the middle of a football game, or when Jake tried to watch his cartoons and got a no signal message. It was petty, maybe, but necessary. They had to learn that the magic trick cost money and effort, and the magician had officially retired. I got up and cooked myself a simple lunch, rice and fresh shrimp I bought down by the docks. As I chopped the cilantro, the smell pulled me back to summers with my husband, back when life was straightforward and the future felt endless. I ate slowly, savouring every bite, listening to the ocean. At 3 p.m, my phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't Robert or Carla. It was Mrs. Matilda, my neighbour from apartment 4B, the only friend I had left in that concrete tower. I answered. "Hello, Eleanor." Her voice was a hushed whisper, like she was calling from a foxhole. "Hi, Matilda. It's so good to hear you," I replied evenly. "Girl, there's a revolution going on over here," she gasped, dropping her voice even lower. "Carla has been screaming in the hallway. She says you stole the keys, that you've lost your mind. Robert is walking around looking like he's at a funeral, completely useless. They knocked on my door a while ago asking if I'd seen you. I told them no, obviously. But Eleanor, are you okay?" "I'm better than ever, Matilda. I'm at my beach house looking at the ocean." I heard my friend exhale a massive sigh of relief. "Oh, thank God. You had me worried sick. Listen, I can hear everything through the drywall. The kids are crying non-stop. That girl Carla doesn't even know how to boil water. Last night, the fire alarm went off because she burned something in the oven. The fire department had to show up. It was a total circus." The mental image of Carla in her pristine corporate suit and flawless manicure, battling smoke and firefighters, was a soothing balm to my bruised soul. "Matty, listen to me carefully," I said, my tone hardening. "If they ask you again, you know nothing. You don't know where I am. Just tell them you saw me leaving with a suitcase and that I looked very determined. That's it. Don't you worry, Eleanor. That woman hasn't so much as said hello to me in the elevator in 5 years. I wouldn't give her the time of day. But are you planning to go back?" I paused. I looked at the white walls of my house, the afternoon light pouring in, clean and unfiltered. "No, Matilda, that Eleanor doesn't exist anymore." I hung up. The chat with Matilda gave me the final piece of intel I needed. The meltdown was real. It wasn't just my imagination hoping for revenge. My absence had triggered the total collapse of their domestic ecosystem in under 36 hours. I decided it was time for the killing stroke. I couldn't let Carla control the narrative with the neighbours or the extended family, spinning a tale that I was crazy or missing. I had to prove I was in total control of my faculties. I took a picture of myself. Not a sloppy selfie that gives you a double chin. I propped the phone on the windowsill, set the timer, and sat back in my rocking chair. I had my new sunglasses on and a glass of iced tamarind juice in my hand, with the ocean rolling behind me. I looked dignified. I looked serene. I looked like I owned myself. I pulled up Robert's contact. I didn't type out a long paragraph. I offered 0 explanations. I just sent the photo and beneath it 3 words. Not in the way. The double blue check marks popped up instantly. They were looking at it. 5 seconds later, the phone started ringing. It was Robert. I watched it buzz on the table 1, 2, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I swiped to answer. I put it on speaker, left the phone on the table, and kept rocking, staring out at the horizon. "Mum, finally!" Robert's voice was high-pitched, right on the edge of a panic attack. "Where are you? Is that Cape Haven? Did you go to the beach house? How did you even get out there?" I didn't answer. I let his anxiety fill the silence. "Mum, you have to come back. This is insane. I can't find the car insurance paperwork and it expires tomorrow. The kids miss you. Nick won't stop crying. Carla is very upset." "Upset?" I asked, with a calm that brutally clashed with his hysteria. "I figured she'd be thrilled. She finally has a house clean of my presence." "Don't say that," Carla's voice cut in. She had snatched the phone. She sounded out of breath, and in the background I could hear cartoons blasting, probably from an iPad since the TV was dead. "Eleanor, this is incredibly childish. Walking out like this without a word. We have responsibilities." "You have responsibilities. Who's going to watch the kids tomorrow? I have a presentation with the regional director. I can't miss it." "That sounds like a logistical problem, Carla," I said, savouring the words like sour candy. "And I have officially retired from logistics." You can't do this to us, she screamed, and her voice finally cracked. For the first time, I heard pure fear underneath the rage. Fear of losing her status. Fear of failing at work. Fear of having to actually be a full-time mother and wife. You're the grandmother. It's your duty. My duty ended the second you told me I was good for nothing, I snapped back. If I'm good for nothing, then I'm no good for watching your kids or scrubbing your floors. You're right, Carla. I'm old, and old people need their rest. Mum, please, Robert whimpered. The cable got cut off. There's no internet. Did you do something? I reviewed my finances, son. Cut out the unnecessary expenses, just like you taught me. Dead silence on the other end of the line. It clicked. Right then, the penny dropped. Not only had the free nanny vanished, but the bank had also closed its doors. You cut off our internet? Carla asked, stunned. With the kids here? The kids can read a book, or play with those plastic soldiers you hate seeing on the floor. I'm coming to get you, Carla threatened, her aggressive edge creeping back. We're driving down this weekend and bringing you back. You can't live out there alone. Something could happen to you. I took off my sunglasses and stared at the phone like I could see right through it. The house is mine, Carla. The deed is in my name. If you set 1 foot on this property without an invitation, I will call the cops for trespassing. And trust me, the sergeant out here has known me for 30 years. I heard Robert gasp. They had never heard me speak like this. Never. Mum, he started. I have company, I lied, watching Joe walk up with some tools. I'm busy living my life. Do not call me again just to yell at me. If you want to talk, learn how to ask for permission. I hung up. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but it wasn't the tachycardia of fear. It was pure adrenaline. I felt powerful. I felt alive. Joe walked into the yard carrying a toolbox and a bag of cement. Afternoon, boss. We starting on that patio wall, he asked. Yes, Joe, I smiled, sliding the phone into my pocket. We're going to build that wall, and I want it high, very high. While Joe started mixing the cement, I glanced at my screen one last time. Robert had sent one more text. Robert, 4:15 p.m. Mum, the fridge is empty. There's no milk for Nick. Can you unlock the grocery account, please? I'll pay you back. I stared at the text. I thought about my grandson. I thought about his little eyes. I felt a sharp pang of pain, a primal instinct to run and fix it. But then Carla's voice rang in my ears. Lazy old woman. I remembered Robert's silence. If I bought them the milk now, they'd never learn how to buy the cow. I powered the phone off. That night, I ate dinner watching the stars from my freshly swept porch. In the distance, the crickets chirped over the sound of the ocean. Back in the city, I pictured Robert standing in line at a crowded supermarket, exhausted, buying overpriced milk with his own money, while Carla tried to put a crying baby to sleep without the crutch of a TV screen. The lesson was just beginning, and I was a teacher with a lot of patience. Saturday broke with a sky so violently blue it hurt to look at. But the peace of my coastal paradise was shattered exactly at 10:30 a.m. I was out on the porch, supervising Joe, who was finishing up varnishing the deck railing, when the strained engine of my son's SUV roared up the driveway. I didn't need binoculars to see the disaster rolling in on 4 wheels. The vehicle, usually spotless, because Robert washed it every Sunday like a religious sacrament, was caked in highway dust and sported a fresh dent on the front bumper. They climbed out looking like survivors of a shipwreck. Robert had dark purple bags hanging under his eyes, a wrinkled dress shirt, and a stained coffee or maybe baby formula splattered across his slacks. But Carla stole the show. The iron lady, the executive with the flawless manicure, looked like she had fought a blender and lost. Her hair was tangled in a messy bun, she had zero makeup on, and her high heels were sinking clumsily into the sandy gravel of the driveway. "Mom!" Robert yelled, jogging toward the fence. His voice was equal parts relief and resentment. I stayed seated in my rocking chair, dark shades on a glass of ice-cold lemonade in my hand. Joe put his brush down, crossed his arms, and stood strategically right behind the gate.
"Good morning," I said without getting up. My tone was the exact one I used when a student walked into class 20 minutes late without an excuse. Carla came huffing up behind him. She didn't say hello. She went straight on the attack like a cornered dog that only knows how to bite. "Open this gate right now, Eleanor," she shrieked, gripping the wooden slats in desperation. "The little game is over. We are going home right now. The kids are in the car, crying from the heat." "The kids can come in and get a cold drink," I replied coolly. "You two are staying outside until you learn some manners." "What is wrong with you?" Carla rattled the fence. "Are you going senile? Look what you've done. Blowing money on this." She pointed at the repairs, the weeded garden, the fresh paint. "That is my kids' inheritance money. You're throwing it away." There it was. The real terror. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern for my health. It was sheer panic that the useless old woman was burning through the assets they had already counted as their own. I stood up slowly, set my glass on the side table, and walked down to the fence. Joe stepped aside respectfully. I took off my sunglasses so they could see my eyes, clear and hard as glass. "Correction, Carla," I said softly. "This is my money. The money I earned working 40 years while you were still figuring out how to walk. And I'm investing it in my happiness, something that was costing me way too much living under your roof." Robert tried to run interference, running a hand through his messy hair. "Mum, please. It's not about the money. It's just the house is a disaster. We don't know how to work the new washing machine. The baby won't eat unless you do the airplane trick. Jake failed his maths test yesterday because nobody sat down to explain it to him. We need you." I looked at him with profound pity. "You don't need me, Robert. You need an unpaid maid, and that position is no longer available." "Stop talking garbage," Carla interrupted, whipping out her phone. "I'm calling the police. I'm going to tell them you're mentally unstable and burning through the family savings. I'll have you declared legally incompetent, you crazy old bat." It was the perfect moment to drop the bomb. I pulled my black notebook out of my apron pocket, the one that had been my silent partner during my escape. "Go ahead, call them," I dared her, flipping the notebook open. "But before you do, let me read you something. I have every single penny I've poured into your house over the last 3 years logged right here. Groceries, $800 a month on average. Utilities, $300. Handyman repairs, because Robert doesn't own a toolbox, another $200. The kids' school supplies, uniforms, co-pays." I took a dramatic pause. The silence was broken only by the crash of the waves and Carla's heavy breathing. "In total, Carla, I have been subsidizing your successful power couple lifestyle to the tune of almost $2,500 a month out of my pension and my savings. Without me, you're not upper middle class. You're broke and drowning in debt." I watched the colour drain completely from Carla's face. She opened her mouth to snap back, but absolutely nothing came out. Robert hung his head in shame. He knew it was true. He knew his paycheck and hers were entirely eaten up by the luxury car payments, the mortgage on the condo in the trendy zip code, and keeping up appearances. I was the invisible financial beam holding up their house of cards. "Did you really think I was living off of you?" I let out a dry laugh. "You were living off of me. The lazy old woman was paying your internet bills so you could ignore her in peace." "But," Robert stammered, "you have money. I swear I thought Dad's money was gone."
What's gone is my patience, son. The money is safe, and it is very, very far out of your reach. Just then, the back door of the SUV popped open. Jake and Lucy scrambled out. They were dishevelled and wearing dirty clothes, but their faces lit up the second they saw me. "Grandma!" they yelled in unison, sprinting toward the fence. "Kids, get back in the car!" Carla shrieked, lunging to grab Lucy's arm, but the little girl yanked away. "No, I want my grandma!" the little girl cried, pressing her face against the wooden slats. I gave Joe a nod. He understood instantly and slid the bolt back, opening the gate. I opened my arms and my grandkids threw themselves at me, nearly knocking me over. They smelled like sweat and stale car air, but I hugged them with everything I had. I felt their little hearts racing against my chest. They were the only innocent casualties in this war. "We're hungry, Grandma," Jake said, looking up at me with those big eyes that were a carbon copy of his father's. "Mum burnt the pizza and Dad only gave us crackers." I looked over the kids' heads at Robert and Carla. They were standing in the driveway, defeated, locked out of this circle of love I had built and they had trashed. "Come on in," I said, but my voice shifted. It wasn't sweet anymore. It was the voice of the property owner. "Joe, could you please help Robert get the kids' bags out of the car? Just the kids' bags." "What about us?" Carla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her arrogance popped like a cheap balloon. "You're functional adults, aren't you?" I replied, steering my grandkids toward the porch. "There's a very nice hotel 3 blocks down. They take credit cards. I just hope yours isn't maxed out now that I'm not footing the grocery bills." "Mom, you can't be kicking us out," Robert pleaded, taking a half step inside the gate. I stopped on the first porch step and turned around. "I'm not kicking you out, Robert. I'm simply not inviting you in. This is my house. There is no screaming here. There is no disrespect here. And above all here, the old woman makes the rules. If you want to see the kids, you can come visit between 2 and 5 p.m. But nobody sits at my table who calls me useless." Carla looked at me with a toxic cocktail of hatred and respect. For the first time in 3 years, she actually looked at me. She didn't see a piece of furniture. She didn't see a burden. She saw a woman with power, resources, and the absolute willingness to use them. "Let's go, Robert," she said, turning around stiffly, desperately trying to scrape together some shred of dignity. "Let's go to the hotel. I need a shower." "But Mum, the kids," Robert hesitated, watching his children already bolting for the kitchen looking for snacks. "The kids are better off with me than with you two in that condition," I stated, ending the debate. "Go, sleep. And tomorrow, if you manage to lower your voices and apologise like decent human beings, maybe I'll offer you a cup of coffee. Maybe." Joe slammed the gate right in their faces the second he dropped the kids' duffel bags on the grass. I heard the SUV engine turn over and crunch down the gravel road. I walked inside. Jake and Lucy were already devouring the sweet rolls left over from breakfast. I poured them cold milk I bought myself with my own money in my own freedom. I sat across from them, brushing a hand through Lucy's hair. I had won the battle, but the war for my dignity was just drawing its new borders. I looked out the window at the ocean. The waves crashed violently, entirely indifferent to human drama, relentless and powerful. That's exactly how I felt. I had reclaimed my territory. Now I just had to teach the invaders that getting into this country required a visa, and the visa was paid strictly in respect. "Eat slow, my darlings," I told them, smiling. "Grandma isn't going anywhere." The morning sun in Cape Haven isn't just light, it's a declaration of intent. It spills through the kitchen window and stretches out across the wooden table like a lazy cat, highlighting the breakfast crumbs and the grinning faces of my grandchildren. It's been 3 months since I got in that taxi in the dead of night. 3 months since my daughter-in-law's "you're good for nothing" became the rocket fuel for my rebirth. Today, the house smells like freshly baked bread and strong coffee, the kind that wakes the dead, not the industrial bleach I used to try and scrub my existence away with in my son's apartment. Jake and Lucy are sitting on the floor, drawing maps on giant pieces of cardboard. They aren't maps of faraway countries, they're maps of Grandma's Island, which is what they've named this property. Jake accurately plots the location of the mango tree, and Lucy fills the ocean with smiling sharks. Watching them like this, calm, without the anxiety of spilling something, without the constant blare of the TV, confirms that my escape wasn't an act of selfishness. It was a rescue mission, for me and for them. Robert and Carla arrived an hour ago. This time there was no screaming at the gate or threatening to call the cops. They rang the bell, they waited, and when I opened the door, they were carrying grocery bags, not suitcases, to move in. It's a random Sunday, but it feels like a diplomatic victory at the end of a long, cold war. "Morning, Mum," Robert said as he walked in, kissing my cheek with a shyness I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Carla walked in behind him. She didn't hug me, that would be asking for blood from a stone, but she held my gaze and nodded. "Hi, Eleanor. I brought the fruit you like, and my own coffee. I know yours is a little intense for me." I smiled to myself. It was an olive branch. Small, a little dry, but an olive branch nonetheless. The dynamic has radically shifted. During the first few weeks after my exit, the chaos in their lives was absolute. Without my money plugging the holes in their domestic economy, they had to face the brutal reality of their finances. The luxury SUV got repossessed. They moved into a smaller apartment, one they could actually afford on their real salaries. And most importantly, they had to learn how to be parents. I watched them from the kitchen as I finished prepping lunch. Robert was out in the yard with Joe, learning how to prune the bushes. He was sweating, pricking his fingers on the thorns, but he didn't quit. Joe, with his infinite patience, was showing him how to hold the shears. "It's not about force, Mr. Robert. It's about finesse. The plant tells you where to cut," the old fisherman explained. Carla was in the living room, sitting on the rug with little Nick. She didn't have her phone in her hand. She was building a tower out of blocks, talking to the baby, actually making eye contact. She looked tired, very tired. Her nails weren't those flawless red acrylic talons anymore. She kept them short now, painted with a clear coat. The stress of the real world had stripped away her corporate superwoman mask, but paradoxically it made her look more human, more real. "Grandma, can I put a volcano on the map?" Jake asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Of course you can, sweetheart. But remember, volcanoes are dangerous and beautiful at the same time. Just like the truth," I replied, winking at him. I served lunch out on the patio, fried fish plantains and a fresh salad. No complicated menus, no special diets. At my table, you eat what's served. And what's served is delicious because it's cooked in peace. Halfway through the meal, Robert cleared his throat nervously. I knew the serious talk was coming. "Mum, we wanted to thank you." He started pushing his food around with his fork. "Not just for having us over today, but well for everything." Carla looked up from her plate. A tense silence fell, broken only by the crashing waves and the clinking of the kids' silverware. "What Robert is trying to say," she stepped in, her voice firm but stripped of its old arrogance, "is that we realised we had to hit rock bottom to realise it. When you cut off the money, we thought you were just being cruel. We were angry, really angry." "I know," I said calmly, pouring myself another glass of hibiscus tea. "But then," Carla sighed, putting her fork down, "the bills came, and the cleaning, and the sick kids, and we realised we weren't a functional family. We were a corporation running on your labour, and you were the unpaid intern." I looked at my daughter-in-law. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't see the enemy. I saw a woman who had been humbled by life and actually had the guts to learn the lesson. "I wasn't an intern, Carla," I corrected her gently. "I was the safety net. And safety nets are dangerous because they make you forget you have to learn how to walk the tightrope all by yourself." "We're sorry, Mum," Robert said, and this time his voice actually cracked. "We called you useless. and the useless ones were us. I reached across the table and took my son's hand. His palms were rough from the yard work he'd just been doing. I liked that texture. It's done. The past is a map we've already navigated, son. What matters is where we're heading next. And next was looking bright. Not perfect, but bright. After lunch, we laid out the new rules of engagement, or as I like to call it, the Treaty of Cape Haven. They come down 2 weekends a month. They don't come to be served, they come to coexist. Robert handles the grill or the yard work. Carla handles washing the dishes and organising activities for the kids. I am the grandmother. Just the grandmother. My job is to spoil them, tell stories and watch the sunset. My money remains my money. I decided to invest a chunk of it into the local town school. I bought computers, books, and naturally, new maps. I go in 3 afternoons a week to tutor the fishermen's kids in geography. They call me Ms. L. When I walk down the dirt roads of the town, people greet me with respect. I am nobody's old woman. I am a distinguished citizen of my small community. That afternoon, as Robert and Carla packed up to leave because they now know they can't sleep over without an explicit invitation, I sat back in my rocking chair. Carla walked up to say goodbye. "Eleanor," she said, hesitating for a second. "Thank you for not unlocking the grocery account when we asked for Nick's milk that day." I looked at her, genuinely surprised. "Why on earth would you thank me for that? It was a harsh thing to do." "Because Robert had to go sell his video game console that same afternoon just to buy the formula," she said, a half smile tugging at her lips. It was the first time I ever saw him sacrifice something of his own for the family without me having to beg him. I think that was the day he actually became a father. I nodded, deeply satisfied. My master plan had worked better than I ever dreamed. Not only had I liberated myself, but I had forced them to liberate themselves from their own immaturity. "Drive safe," I told them. "And Carla, next time bring that lemon tart you say you make so well. I'd like to try it." Her eyes lit up. It was a challenge, but it was also an invitation. "I will, and I promise you're gonna love it." I watched them buckle the kids into the car, which was no longer a massive luxury SUV, but a modest used sedan. Jake and Lucy waved frantically from the window. "Bye, Grandma, guard the map," Jake yelled. When the car disappeared around the bend in the road, silence rolled back over my porch. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence vibrating with possibilities. Joe walked around from the backyard, wiping his hands on a rag. "They left happy boss," he noted, leaning against a pillar. "They left better Joe," which is different. I stood up and walked down to the beach. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in those violent shades of violet and orange that only exist over the ocean. My feet sank into the warm sand. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It smelled like salt, freedom, and dignity. I thought about the Eleanor from 3 months ago. That hunched, aching woman, scrubbing dishes while crying in total silence. I wanted to reach back through time, hug her, and tell her, "Hold on, girl. Be patient. The lioness inside you is just taking a nap." I've discovered that getting old isn't the end of the road, nor is it some dark corner where you sit and wait to die. It's a summit. And from up here, the view is spectacular. I am 71 years old. My knees crack when it's dry out, and I need glasses to read the fine print. But I am the master of my time, my space, and my destiny. I've learned that respect isn't asked for, it's commanded through action. That love does not equal servitude, and that sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer your children is to let them fall so they learn how to stand back up. I pulled my black notebook out of my pocket, the one that had been my confidant and my emotional ledger. I flipped to the very last page, the blank one, took out a pen and wrote a single sentence. Something to never forget. something to read every morning with my coffee. Never apologize for taking up space in the world. I looked out at the massive, eternal, unstoppable ocean. A wave smashed violently against the rocks, throwing white foam into the air. I am that rock. I have weathered the storms, I have taken the hits, and I am still standing. Smoother, maybe, harder, definitely, but completely unmovable. The breeze tangled my hair, that grey hair I no longer dye, because I've earned every single silver strand like a medal of war. I smiled. Tomorrow I have class with the kids in town. We're studying the continents. I'm going to teach them that the world is massive, endless, and that absolutely nobody has the right to tell you your place is in a small, dark corner. The lazy old woman has a lot of work to do, and damn am I going to enjoy it. I turned around and walked back to my house, my castle, where the only queen is me, and where happiness is no longer a gift I wait for others to give me, but a harvest I cultivate with my own 2 hands. Life begins many times as you have the guts to hit restart. And mine, the real one, it just started. Disclaimer. Please note that the following statement and the story it reflects upon, including any thematic similarities to the Jetsa, are created strictly for educational purposes, to inspire personal growth, empathy, and emotional reflection. Reflections and life lessons. Eleanor's harrowing but ultimately triumphant journey in the provided narrative forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about family dynamics and the boundaries of unconditional love. For years, she sacrificed her physical well-being and financial stability to serve as an unpaid maid and nanny for her son Robert and daughter-in-law Carla, who ultimately dismissed her as a useless burden. This heartbreaking dynamic is a powerful reflection on how easily selfless devotion can be twisted into an expected, unappreciated entitlement. We often fall into the trap of believing that true family loyalty means endlessly absorbing disrespect to keep the peace. Just as Eleanor silently endured her son's cowardly silence while his wife verbally abused her. However, the profound life lesson here is that our intrinsic dignity does not evaporate with age, nor is it measured by our domestic utility. Eleanor's decision to quietly pack her blue suitcase and relocate to her coastal property in Cape Haven was not merely an escape. It was a radical reclamation of her self-worth. By cutting off the financial subsidies that funded their upper-middle-class illusion, she delivered the greatest act of tough love possible. She allowed them to face the unfiltered consequences of their own lives, forcing them to mature and truly appreciate the invisible labour that had been carrying them. To apply this to our own lives, we must continuously recognise that setting firm boundaries is not a betrayal of love, but a strict requirement for healthy relationships. You must never allow your inherent kindness to be weaponized against your own peace of mind. True respect is commanded through firm action, and sometimes letting others fall is the absolute only way they will ever learn how to stand back up independently. Personal commentary. As I reflect on this narrative, I am struck by the quiet, undeniable strength required to walk away from the people you love in order to save yourself. It is profoundly moving to see an elder refuse to be relegated to a dark, forgotten corner of a crowded home. Society often conditions us to view aging as a period of fading relevance, but this story beautifully shatters that misconception. I believe that true empowerment lies in recognizing when your presence is no longer valued and having the courage to remove it entirely. The sheer audacity to stop funding a lifestyle that disrespects you is a lesson in both financial and emotional independence that everyone needs to internalize. We frequently mistake a lack of arguing for peace, when in reality, it is often just the painful suppression of our own boundaries. Observing the protagonist's transformation from an exhausted caretaker to a vibrant community leader reminds us that rebirth is always possible, regardless of our age. The ocean in this story serves as a perfect metaphor for washing away the grime of unappreciated sacrifices and returning to one's true nature. I deeply admire the emotional restraint shown in not rushing back to fix the manufactured emergencies of fully capable adults. By allowing her family to feel the sting of the real world, a more genuine, albeit harder foundation for a future relationship was built. It proves unequivocally that taking up space in the world is a fundamental human right, not a privilege granted by our children's convenience. We absolutely must stop equating familial duty with endless, soul-crushing servitude. Your golden years should be a joyful harvest of your life's hard work, not a relentless continuation of exhaustive domestic labour. The courage to demand respect, even from our own flesh and blood, is the ultimate testament to preserving our human dignity. Ultimately, we are the sole architects of our own joy, and we hold the power to redraw the map of our existence at any given moment.